Formed by Congress in 1934 and dedicated in 1940, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park became an officially protected swath of land. Spanning eastern Tennessee and western North Carolina, the park covers over 800 square miles of land and contains a significant portion of the Appalachian Trail within its boundaries. In 2021, Great Smoky Mountains National Park hosted 14.1 million visitors, consistently making it the most visited national park in the United States. When you think of the Smoky Mountains, you think of the mountain mist and the never-ending natural beauty of the area. Compared to other mountain ranges like the Rocky Mountains in the west, the Smokies seem lesser due to their relative height. This couldn't be further from the truth, however, because the Smoky Mountains and the entire Appalachian mountain range were at one point taller than the Rocky Mountains. Because of extreme weathering and erosion over the older Smoky Mountains, they have since had their peaks taken from them and given back to the earth. The Smoky Mountains are some of the oldest mountains in the world, much older than the Rockies. The story of the Smokies begins about 1 billion years ago, as Precambrian rocks were beginning to form. These rocks would eventually form the Ocoee supergroup, a series of rocks that laid the foundation for the future mountains and are still the most abundant type of rock found in the Smoky Mountains. About 480 million years ago, the Earth went through a series of violent changes. The former supercontinents separated, as the North American tectonic plate retreated west. This led to the creation of early oceans filling what would become the East Tennessee Valley, and others like it that surrounded the future Smoky Mountains. Over the next 100 million years, the plates continued to move around until they came crashing together about 400 million years ago. The North American plate smashed into the African plate, creating the land folds that formed the early Smoky Mountains. Since then, the Smoky Mountains have come to form their contemporary shape and terrain through heavy erosion and weathering. The Smoky Mountains had to go through a period of extreme change to become the national park it is today. Despite the Cherokee people's claim that the mountains were the birthplace of their tribe, they were swiftly removed by Andrew Jackson and the U.S. government under the guise of manifest destiny. Even though the Cherokee were officially banished, some of them fled to the most remote regions of the Smokies to live out their lives. The descendants of these brave Cherokee would go on to form the eastern band of the Cherokee Indians. Today, these Cherokee live in the Qualla Boundary, a federal piece of land touching the southeastern border of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. After the removal of the Cherokee, European settlers flocked to the mountains, hoping to find new lives and freedom. While they did find a certain distinct freedom, they have since been treated as second-class citizens and backward people. As the industrial age of the 19th century boomed, the Smoky Mountains suffered. Logging, mining, and railroads dominated the natural landscape. Clear-cut forests, polluted water sources, and air pollution began creeping into the Smoky Mountains natural ecosystem. It wasn't until the late 19th century and early 20th century that Americans saw how industry poisoned the Smoky Mountains. Horace Kephart and Ann Davis were two of the most prominent individuals to popularize the fight for the Smoky Mountain National Park. Kephart, a well-known travel writer, had been an advocate of the Smokies for most of his life. Ann Davis, a newly elected state legislator, helped convince politicians of the people's need for a new national park in the Smokies after she visited Yellowstone. National parks were still in their infancy when momentum for the protection of the Smoky Mountains gained steam. Yellowstone had just been created in the West. Fortunately, the U.S. government was already searching for a potential site for an eastern national park. Pressure mounted in the early 20th century as citizens demanded Washington give them a park. Massive support from Knoxville, Tennessee and Asheville, North Carolina poured in, as the people were ready to do whatever it took to form this national park. Interestingly, it might have been the invention of the automobile that tipped the scales in the favor of the people. Barely a couple of decades old, the automobile gave people an excuse to travel more so than they ever had. The public interest in traveling scenic roads skyrocketed, and might have been the deciding factor for the creation of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. In May of 1926, President Calvin Coolidge signed a bill that allowed the Great Smoky Mountains National Park to be formed. But it wasn't anything more than words on paper, as there was no land held by the federal government to create the park. A law prohibiting the government from purchasing land to be used for a national park stood in the way of the national park for the Smoky Mountains. David Chapman, a prominent Knoxville businessman, was chosen to become the head of a commission to create the national park. With his leadership, the commission was able to secure the funds for the land purchases needed to form the park. John Rockefeller Jr. donated $5 million to the cause, and the rest of the funds were raised through donations from everyday citizens. Still, though, the work wasn't done, as thousands of pieces of land had to be surveyed, appraised, and offers sent to the owners. Even the same industrial corporations that poisoned the mountains had to be compensated for their investments in the area. Beyond the financial burden of purchasing land, many citizens were being asked to give up their ancestral land and all they have known for their entire lives just for a national park. Many resisted. Others ironed out deals that let them stay until they died. A few even negotiated a temporary stay until they could find a new place to go. Regardless of a household's circumstances, life in the future park was over. Anyone still living in the park, even with permission, could not live their lives the same way they had. There was no cutting down of trees, hunting, or anything else that would alter the protected ecosystem. While this had to be done, it is also sad for those that lost their way of life so abruptly. Even though the bill in 1926 meant to establish a national park in the east, the park would not officially be formed until 1934, when all the land deeds were transferred to the government and construction of public facilities had been started. Not only did the superintendent of the park create new facilities for the park, but they also worked to restore buildings already built on park lands. This is where the Civilian Conservation Corps began its story. The Civilian Conservation Corps was originally formed during the Great Depression to form new jobs for the unemployed. Over the years, it turned into an army that, instead of fighting for our country, fought to protect and enhance the natural beauty of our country. They were responsible for the majority of trails, fire towers, public facilities, and fire suppression through the park. Finally, in 1940, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt dedicated the national park at Newfound Gap, right where the borders of Tennessee and North Carolina meet. Here's a few facts about the Great Smoky Mountain National Park that you probably knew, but maybe not. It was created in 1934, dedicated in 1940. It covers 816 square miles. Klingman's Dome sits at 6,643 feet, and that's the highest point in the park, and it's also the highest point on the Appalachian Trail. 16 mountains reach above 5,000 feet in elevation. Annual precipitation ranges from 50 to 80 inches a year. 95% of the park is forest. 100,000 potential species have yet to be discovered in the park. The park is renowned for its diverse salamander population. Tourism injects over $2.5 billion annually into the local economy. And there are 14.1 million visitors in 2021. And the Great Smoky Mountains National Park has consistently held the title of the most visited national park in the United States.